You're listening to Linked AM. Tell your story on Linked Live and get noticed. You're listening to Karl Wolfenden on the Business Class Show and is not always affiliated with the guests and the topics discussed. Any financial statements are the opinions of the individual, and you should seek professional advice before making any decisions. Upgrade your listening to Business Class, the show that puts you in the big leather comfy seats. So sit back and enjoy our take on the trending business issues of the week.
Howdy, folks. Here he is, the Texas Brit, the guy with the stiff upper lip, filling his 10-gallon hat and his cowboy boots, Karl Wolfenden.
Good morning, and welcome to Business Class News. And actually, this is a special feature that we've actually put together because, over the past, few weeks as such, we've been having a lot of conversations about, planning. And, of course, we're coming into that last quarter, of course. Well, we're in the last quarter now. And we like to call it Race to the Start Line. And we've been having emails come in. And one particular sort of industry sector that was quite interesting for me came through. It was from the health care area of dentists, and quite a few dentists. They've been going through sort of challenges of opening up their practices with COVID, and of course things are back to normal because I know that because my daughter's getting her wisdom teeth taken out very soon, and so we're all in that planning stage, and they've been asking me questions about what should we be doing about, looking at the future. I suppose everybody's started to think about what needs to be done because they've gone through something that they've never been through before, this COVID situation, and it's making people think. So my friends over at Lathrop GPM, were talking to me about that they have a specific sort of plan for this type of, planning succession side of things. And so I thought I'd have my friends on, and I've also got another guest of theirs that they've invited on. And here they're on the studio now. So thank you for joining me, gentlemen. Look at that. You look all sort of very, very crisp and all on the Zoom meeting side of things as we have. And of course, you're all in St. Louis, I believe, and that's a city that I used to go to on a frequent basis, as we've talked about off camera, but we don't need to go into that. So, of course, we've got Scott Malin on. He's a partner over at Lathrop GPM. We've got Mike Adrian, of course, another partner at Lathrop GPM, and Adam Goldstein, who, of course, is with Buckingham Strategic Wealth Advisors. And so thank you for joining me this morning. And as I said, we're getting a lot of questions from the healthcare perspective, but specifically from dentists. And we thought we'd put this special sort of little segment together, a feature, really to sort of ask those questions. And so Scott, first of all, thanks for joining me this morning. And, what's your perspective on, what somebody should be thinking about? Estate planning comes up in conversation. What is it that they need to be thinking about?
Well, first of all, thank you for having us this morning. We appreciate it. Everybody should have the basic plan in place. And a lot of that has come up during COVID just because people get a little bit nervous these days about all the things that could happen. And the basic plan, which is not really unique to dentists or dental practices, is a will and a trust, likely, and usually a financial power of attorney, and then healthcare documents. And again, that's really the building block of a plan, but almost everybody needs that. What is more unique to the dentist is that, first of all, they're business owners. They generally own their practices, and so you have to deal with that as a special asset. And then the second part is that many of them are individual business owners. They own 100% of their practice, and they need to deal with what would happen if something happens to them, either on an emergency basis or in the event of an untimely death on a long-term basis. So those are very unique to the practice because those practices can't go on if they're not there for the most part. And so they have to address that in a lot of different ways. And there's very different ways to look at it.
So, with any business, I suppose, I mean, we've talked about it in the past about, how you need to start thinking about who is going to take over the business, what happens if there's a catastrophic event. And now we've got to think about if there's a pandemic, so is there a right time to start thinking about this in terms of, do we need to just, do it overnight, or is it something you really need a plan?
Yeah, you need to plan, and there really are two different things that, two different ways to go about it. One is the unexpected need to have someone replace you, and that, again, that could be in the event of an illness or a disability, or it could also be an unexpected death where something untimely happens. What's going to happen to the practice? Who's going to take it over? Who's going to come in and be able to at least run it on a short-term basis so that it could be sold and the value could be maximized? If you haven't done that, and typically the dentist is the most important person there and is responsible for most of the revenue. So if that person is gone just like that, and there's no plan, then the value of the practice is mostly gone, and that's a challenge. So you want to plan for that possibility, and then the second part is the more timely planning that does take it could take several years, which is, okay, I don't expect anything to happen in the next year, but over the next 5 years, I want to move on from the practice. I want to transition it to somebody. Maybe it's a child who's coming into the business. Maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's somebody who's unrelated, and I need to identify that person, and then I need to take the time to transition to make sure that it's gonna work for everybody.
So, Adam, that was made complete sense, Scott. I mean, Adam, you work closely with Lathrop GPM and work on these types of. So, based on what Scott was saying, you've got to start looking at the holistic side of your business, haven't you? From a wealth, sort of planning stage. From when you. So, how do you approach this?
So oftentimes it comes into play where it could be, oh, I have a friend who's going to retire, or I have somebody that I know that that ended up with cancer or some other illness. And it takes, unfortunately, something like that to trigger the desire. But it's something just part of the natural process that we talk about all the time, because we all know that, there's a start, there's a middle, there's an end. When you're starting, it's a whole nother set of issues. But when you come to that end, it involves a lot of the psychology of it. It is, are you ready? If you are ready, what are you going to do when you're done practicing? Because a lot of these owners, they identify themselves and their identity's wrapped up in the practice. I am a dentist. And that's what they know themselves as. That's what the public knows them as. That's when they go to their church, their temple, their mosque, whatever it is, that's how they're known, because those are the relationships that they've built. And they're used to working long hours. And, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're giving up a lot of family life because they have to be there to produce a dollar. So there's a lot of identity wrapped up into it. So a lot of it really starts with peeling back the layers of, you are not, as your identity, a dentist. That's just what you do for a living. What else do you want after practicing as a dentist? So there's that psychological component, and then there's the financial component. A lot of times, dentists make good money compared to the rest of the public. How are you spending? How are you saving? What does that lifestyle need? By planning for this transition at some point, it allows us to really make sure that, yes, you can live your comfortable lifestyle, your retirement lifestyle, when that time comes, by selling your practice, because we've done all this preparation ahead of time. So we have, cash flow needs and everything else met to, again, go and live this next phase of your life. So it's really that psychological and that financial component. And I would say most of the time, the psychological component is the hardest. I have several clients that are, 70 plus years old and working, because they can't part ways with just, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I love. And again, having them separate from the practice. So again, psychology of it is really, I would say, the tougher of the two parts, but they really go hand in hand, because if you don't have enough money to retire, you're not going to be able to retire either way. So those are the two components that we see quite often, and especially when working on these transitions with Scott and Mike.
So you actually put a good point forward there with the psychology. We hear it a lot from the audience that's out there, and with clients that I work with, from actually publicizing them and get them out there. They're so ingrained into the business because they started it and everything, and they know all their customers. It's that it is very difficult sometimes to leave go. And we're going to move on to Mike in a second with M&A and mergers and acquisitions. We find that a lot with founders saying, I don't know whether I want to sell, but it's but you can't get to a point where you can retire, as you say, without understanding, can I retire? And then once you say, yes, I can, then you start working on, well, I want that beach house. I want to go to Florida. I want to, do the world cruise or go to Edinburgh on the train, as we talked about off mic a few minutes ago. So I think it's very important to have that. Scott, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, this just adding to that and the psychological aspect that they are professionals and that's what they've done their entire life. As Adam has said, they have established relationships with their patients and their families often for decades. And it's very hard to just walk away from that and turn it off one day. And so if you don't have that plan in place, it's very difficult to do an effective transition because the person doesn't want to step away and the person coming in wants to get involved. They don't want to wait several more years. And so that's a really important aspect. And the other thing is just, I think from an advice standpoint is it's very difficult for people to go from 100 miles an hour in their practice to 0 miles an hour in a day. And so it works much better psychologically and also often from a business standpoint to phase it out over time a little bit. So you're not running 100% one day and then you walk out the door the next day. That there's a sort of slow down transition and a ramp so that when you do walk away, you're sort of you've gotten to a certain point where you're now comfortable. You're not working 5 or 6 or 7 days a week. That's what I have found. That's a really important part for the success of the transition.
So Mike, you see a lot of these situations where people start to talk. They've been with Adam and they started looking at the wealth side of things and the planning, and then with Scott on the estate planning succession sort of process. Sometimes it's not just siblings that are going to take over. It might be another bigger group. I mean, I've seen big groups come in and then absorb smaller practices as such on the medical side, and that psychological thing comes in there. Do I want to really go on and sell my practice onto a bigger practice as such? But what do you see out there, and what are the things that people need to be looking for?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting element, and we have learned over the last year that even if you're not aware that your clients are being approached by other third parties, they are, and they would appreciate having the conversation, kind of like we're talking about here, getting prepared. How do you take that next step? How do you engage with those folks? What do you do to be ready for those conversations? And some folks are actually looking to expand, and they don't know how to take that first step. And so I think backing up and making sure that they understand a lot of this isn't unique to the M&A space. It's corporate hygiene, right? You start at the very base. How is your entity organized? Do you have an entity? If you don't, wow, we should really talk to you about limitations of liability. We should talk to you about tax planning, bringing in professionals like Adam, bringing in folks like accountants, bringing them into the conversation is critical. The other elements, as Scott mentioned, they're just used to plowing through their work. They're happy with their day-to-day. It's probably been going on for a significant period of time. They're not worried about their lease. They're not worried about, the work that other folks in the office are performing for them. But, when you step back and you kind of ask the questions, what is the status of your lease? Is it month to month? Well, maybe a buyer will come in and really want that space and be spooked by the fact that it's month to month and it's kind of an oral arrangement or something along those lines. The same thing with the staff, especially. Scott mentioned that the relationship with the dentist is so critical with the patients, but also the hygienists and the other folks in the office. You have to plan and make sure that they are on board. You don't have to have written employment agreements with non-solicits and non-competes with everybody, but you at least need to bring them into the conversation to make sure that they know kind of where you stand and what your long-term thoughts are with respect to the practice.
Yeah, I think we've found that out. We've done a couple of conversations with practitioners, mainly on the medical side, and that's one of the things that they take for granted. They take for granted that the office manager, who actually, because you're busy doing the day-to-day things, but the office manager actually runs the whole administration side, and you need to make sure that that's all bundled up and tightened up, etc. And a conversation I just had the other day, it was about corporate governance. I mean, corporate governance is a word that not many health practitioners and dentists really use in their day-to-day language. But they need to understand if they did have an entity, they set it up, and if you've got partners or you've got different sort of investors, etc., what do those articles, actually say? What do they need to be doing? Make sure that, when you're ready to sell or you're moving on or you succeed, somebody from your family member is going to take over the business, that everything is planned out. And I think that affects, doesn't it, the wealth management side, Adam, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And we see right now, I'm thinking of a handful of dentists that we work with that have children that are coming into the practice. And it really, how do you sell to them? How do you engage them? How do you get them, on their own separate footing so that way they can learn and grow? And how are you teaching them? And so you have this family element, this family component. And then how do you equalize that out with, the children who aren't in the practice? And there's some really interesting planning components there, but it allows some doctors to continue to practice dentistry into their, we have one who's almost in his 80s and he loves going into the office every day. The patients love seeing him every day. The staff absolutely adore him because he is one of the most amazing people you'll ever meet. But at the same time, he has a son in the practice and he has a daughter who's not. And there's very different ways to treat that and very different ways from a financial planning perspective. And again, it goes back to that emotion and that psychology of it and how do you equalize versus make something fair? And there's a very different conversation we have there. And I'm sure Scott and Mike have that equal versus fair conversation quite regularly with their clientele because, again, what is equal is not always fair. So lots of different planning components there. How do you pay for the practice if you're the child coming in? How do you, how long do you keep your parent involved if you are the new owner? Lots of interesting complexity. And then again, as the owner, how do you let go? How do you train? How do you, use a soft but firm, touch with your child to say, hey, I'm going to step away from this component of the practice. Typically, it's the day-to-day operational side that they no longer want to do, but you got to do it my way. Well, you don't need to do it my way because the child's going to typically have a better understanding of technology and may have some relationships outside of your current providers that they don't want to use. And that's okay. But again, it goes back to just talking through and making sure there's that open dialogue. Are you having at least a weekly meeting outside of the office to talk through, hey, this is what's going right, this is what's going wrong, or this is what is working for me, what's working for you, and how are you, engaging in that productive dialogue? Again, the financial planning side, it can fall into place as long as the team sport is being played. And again, I think you have three different individuals in this conversation right now because it takes all three of us to really make this successful and make it work for not only the buyer but the seller as well. So.
Fantastic. So, Scott, we're unfortunately coming to the end of the segment, but this has been awesome. I really do appreciate you, all three of you, joining me. So, Scott, just in summary, what does somebody watching this need to take away to start thinking? Okay, I got to start that process today. What's that process?
Yeah, I think, well, the most important thing is what you just said, is start the process today. Don't wait until it's too late. That's the problem that a lot of people have because it's easy to put it off. You have to deal with your issues in the business every day. You don't have a choice. You have emergencies, you have patients, you have the operations of the business. That has to be done. The planning, you can put it off. And the most important thing is what you just said. Like I said, do it today, get focused on it, start the process. And then the process is, meeting with your attorney, meeting with your financial advisor, and just determining what your goals are. That's always my first question. What do you want this to look like at the end? After this plays out, if it goes exactly as planned, which obviously it doesn't always, but if it does, what do you want it to look like at the end? And then it's our job to come up with a strategy as far as what do we need to do to get you to the ultimate goal for you.
That's great. So, Mike, just rounding this out now. I mean, we've heard about the wealth planning and the estate planning as such. What do you see that from your side? What would you, if somebody comes to you tomorrow or this afternoon, what are the things that they need to have in place so it makes it a smooth transition from your side of things?
Well, I think I'll answer it with the way that I do not like starting conversations, and that is when the client comes to us and says, I just signed this LOI. Can you help me with it? Does it look okay? Because again, that is 3 steps removed and probably more than that from where we really want to start the process. To Adam's point a while ago, do you have enough? Can you even quantify what it would take for you to walk away and be happy with this transaction? Unless the client understands all of these elements, including what's in that term sheet, they can't make that determination on their own. And frankly, we can't make it for them either. And so I think really having, taking a step back, as Adam mentioned as well, taking a step back from the day-to-day grind to look at what your eventual goals are and where you want this practice to go is the most critical piece. And we're happy to have conversations very early on in the transaction. I'm an M&A attorney, but I love the transaction or the conversations that we have at the outset where you're just running your business and you just want to bounce some ideas off us. We'd love to have that conversation and make sure that, folks are comfortable with the entire process.
Gentlemen, this has been an amazing conversation, and I'm sure we're going to get tons of inquiries. I'm going to be throwing them over to you as such to really for you to answer those questions. But I think the key word of this whole segment has been planning. You got to start thinking about what your future looks like, how you can sit on the beach and then just enjoy and then reap the benefits of what you put in for all that hard work, but knowing that your practice is actually in safe hands of who you've just sold it to or you've actually transferred it to. I mean, that's the key thing, because in every entrepreneur's mind it's my baby, and they're my clients, they're my customers, they become friends, as you say, especially in a health practitioner's, environment, a dentist environment, they become friends. So it's just getting to know what you need to do. So we need to be talking to you. You need to be talking to you early on, and then let's get that plan in place so that you're ready to make that move. And guys, I really appreciate all the input you've put into this, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, that was a great discussion about planning and how specifically in the dentist industry, in the health practitioners industry as well, dentists, though, need to be thinking about how they can transition from where they are today to where they want to be. I think that's where it is, where you want to be. And I think Adam actually said, maybe they want to stay on. You can still transition, but you can stay on and still enjoy the camaraderie of the staff and the customers and all your patients, etc. So it's an important conversation to have. So I'm going to put all the information, of course, on the website on businessclassnews.com. It's our business insights section, and as I always say, be out there, get out there. Have some fun and, make some money. See ya. Bye-bye.